Welcome to Narca Tales. They say blood is thicker than water, but what if that very blood, seemingly flowing with love, turns icy, poisoning every bond it touches? Tonight, we unravel a story from the quiet suburbs of Indiana, where a grandmother's longing morphed into obsession, and a young family vanished into the night. I'm your host, and this is the tale of O.P., let's call her Margaret, a doting mother in her golden years, whose world spun off its axis after the birth of her newest granddaughter. At 50, Margaret believed herself seasoned in the ways of family. She'd raised her only son, David, now 31, with tireless devotion. She'd adored her 10-year-old granddaughter from David's first relationship. And when David married his sweetheart, only 24, Margaret welcomed her with open arms. Yet, in the months after little Emma entered the world, that love curdled into something dark and unrecognizable. Margaret reached out, again and again, desperate to cradle her tiny namesake. But each invitation was rebuffed. Her calls went unanswered, her visits declined. The cradle she'd once expected to rock in her arms sat uncomfortably quiet under her daughter-in-law's watchful eye. It started in late January, when Brianna was rushed to the hospital under storm-dark skies, induced for preeclampsia after days of agonizing labor. Margaret's heart pounded for her daughter-in-law, her granddaughter, her son. She begged David to drive her to the hospital, yet he refused, asked instead that she trust him and Brianna to handle the final hours. When Emma finally emerged into the world, a small, perfect beacon, Margaret listened anxiously to whispered reports over a crackling phone line, straining to hear the newborn's cry. A few days later, her daughter, Laura, brought groceries and medicine, slipping past Brianna's weary smile to cradle the newborn herself. Margaret waited for her turn. She imagined the moment she would step gingerly through hospital doors, past the nurse's desk, down the soft-lit corridor. Even a single photo would taste like victory. But the minutes turned to hours, then days, and still no word. Brianna and David declined her visits, citing postpartum recovery, stress, and the need for space. Margaret's worry mutated into a cold suspicion. Had postpartum depression become something far worse? Helpless hours in her empty house spun into days of self-doubt. At night, she scrolled the internet for clues, red flags of PPD, preeclampsia, stolen grandmothers. She raided her medicine cabinet for painkillers, though she had no pain, just a gnawing ache in her chest. Then came Mother's Day, when every daughter and granddaughter posts sun-drenched selfies online. Margaret sat before her blank Facebook page and, on a desperate impulse, announced, "Our family grew by one beautiful girl, Emma. Proud grandma again." A cascade of congratulations lit her screen, until a single message arrived, unreadable, "Take that down." Her heart twisted. How dare this young new mother silence her? Margaret snapped, phoning David in a heated rage. "You should have brought her to me," she cried. "Mom," he sighed. "I told you, Brianna needs rest. She just had major surgery." Rest. Surgery. A single word, C-section, felt like an insult to Margaret's sacrifice. That night, she closed her eyes to dreams of cradling Emma, only to wake in sweat, tears soaking her pillow. She called her best friend, Evelyn, confessing she'd grown so distant and felt cut out of her own family. Evelyn, ever kind, suggested, "Maybe Brianna needs time. Let them come to you." But when 2 weeks passed with no phone calls, no visits, no peek at the baby's tiny hand, Margaret's confusion curdled into fury. She loaded her savings into a private investigator's retainer, determined to find her family. She replayed every slight, the unreturned calls, the curt "we'll reschedule," the blank spaces in her photo album where Emma's newborn snapshots should have lived. Then, one grey morning, a letter slid under her door, a terse notice from Brianna's lawyer. Under no circumstances could Margaret set foot on their property or contact them directly. Any attempt to see Emma would be considered harassment. They had moved. No forwarding address available. If Margaret persisted, they would seek a restraining order. Margaret's world spun away. No one had spoken of why this was happening, only that it was. She called David, weeks later, begging for answers. He replied quietly, "Mom, you crossed a line. You showed up unannounced. You tried to break into our house. I just wanted to hold my granddaughter, she sobbed. They're scared, Mom, he said. Scared for the baby's safety. Safety? The word echoed like a taunt. Her baby. Their child. As the months crawled on, Margaret became a fixture in doorstops and neighborhood gossip. The realtor called her daily for the sale of the old house. Families peeked through windows at the empty rooms. She spent nights in a camper outside their former home, scanning straw-yellow fields for any sign of David's car. She confided in Evelyn that she'd finally file for grandparent visitation, but only if she could find them first. This relentless pursuit warped her bright eyes into haunted pools. Friends stopped calling, frightened by her obsession. Let it go, Margaret, they whispered. They're gone. Then, on a cool October evening, nearly 9 months after Emma's birth, a letter arrived, academic records for a surprise transfer. David would begin graduate school in another state. They had rented a rural farmhouse disguised under an LLC. The old home sold at a loss, and they vanished. Despair broke Margaret's spirit. She sat once more in that camper as rain pelted the roof. The sweet idea of a baby blanket tucked in her lap now brought only emptiness. A single realization struck her like lightning: she never needed a lawyer. She needed herself. And then, the twist. In that battered house she'd abandoned, tucked in the corner of the nursery closet, lay a battered showbox. Inside, a stack of faded photograph albums, from before Emma's birth. The covers read, David, growing up, our first family Christmas, junior high graduation. Margins scrawled in youthful ink, Mom's the best. Margaret flipped to the last photo, a teenage David, beaming in a hospital gown, clutching her hand. Written beneath, when Mom was sick, I needed her here. Tears blurred her vision as realization bloomed. Years ago, Margaret had survived a near-fatal car crash, days spent in a coma, unable to recognize her son. David's tears and prayers had been her lifeline. She'd come home a stranger, struggled to walk and talk. During those weeks, he had cared for her. In that haze of recovery, she'd never thanked him enough. And when his labor arrived, when he needed her most, she had demanded her turn. She had treated Brianna's pain as her own neglect, rather than a mirror, the same fear, the same helplessness. The next morning, Margaret left the camper behind. She took the photos, the showbox, and drove not to the farmhouse where they lived, but to the hospital where her journey nearly ended all those years ago. She found her way to the pediatric ward, where another frightened mother cradled her infant with that same hollow terror. Margaret sat beside her, holding her trembling hand. She whispered, I'm here now. She did not need to find David or Emma. She needed to be found by the new mother in that ward, to repay the kindness so freely given to her son once before. Her own healing began not with legal battles or investigators, but with a heart finally open to remember. Family is not owned, it is earned, through empathy, sacrifice, and grace. And in that bright, antiseptic corridor, Margaret became more than a grandmother left at the curb. She became a witness to another life, ready to love without demand, to serve without complaint, and to give without expectation. Because sometimes, the most beautiful reunions happen not at a set of polished doors, but in the quiet space where two souls recognize each other's wounds and choose to heal together. Thank you for watching Narca Tales. If you found meaning in Margaret's journey, subscribe for more stories that remind us, love may fracture, but it also has the power to mend what seems irreparable.